A lonely rancher stopped a drunk uncle from trading his niece for whiskey, and protected her. The autumn wind cut through Copper Creek like a rusty blade, carrying the scent of dried sage and the distant promise of snow. Eleanor May Harrison pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out of Murphy's general store, a small sack of flour clutched against her chest. The wooden planks of the boardwalk creaked beneath her worn boots, each step echoing in the late afternoon silence that had settled over the frontier town. At 19, Ellie possessed a quiet beauty that seemed almost out of place in the rough-hewn world of Montana territory. Her auburn hair, usually pinned back in a practical bun, caught the golden light filtering through the dusty windows of the buildings lining Main Street, but her green eyes, once bright with youth and hope, now carried the weight of too many disappointments and too many nights spent wondering where her next meal would come from. She quickened her pace as she approached the Silver Dollar Saloon, its bat-wing doors swinging lazily in the evening breeze. The raucous laughter and off-key piano music that typically spilled from within had been replaced by an ominous quiet. Ellie's stomach tightened with a familiar dread as she climbed the narrow stairs to the cramped room above the saloon that she reluctantly called home. The door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap she could hear her uncle's voice, slurred and desperate. "I'm telling you, Graves, she's worth more than that. Look at her. Young, healthy, pretty as a picture. She could work your tables, serve drinks, maybe even entertain your better customers." Ellie's blood ran cold. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give her away. Through the crack, she could see her uncle, Thomas Harrison, swaying unsteadily on his feet before a well-dressed man with cold, calculating eyes. Solomon Graves owned the Silver Dollar and half the buildings in Copper Creek, and everyone knew his reputation for exploiting desperate souls. "Your debts are considerable, Tom," Graves said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. 3 months of unpaid rent, not to mention what you owe for whiskey. But I'm a reasonable man. The girl works for me for 2 years, and we'll call it even. She's family, Saul, my brother's daughter. I can't just—" "You can and you will," Graves interrupted, pulling out a bottle of whiskey and placing it on the rickety table between them. "Unless you'd prefer I collect my debts in other ways. You know how creative I can be when it comes to collection." Thomas's eyes fixed on the bottle like a starving man staring at a feast. His hands shook as he reached for it, then pulled back. 2 years is a long time, Sewell. Maybe we could work out something else, some other arrangement. This is my final offer, Tom. Take it or face the consequences. Ellie closed her eyes, fighting back tears of rage and helplessness. She had known this day would come eventually, ever since her parents died in a wagon accident 3 years ago, leaving her in the care of her father's only brother. She had watched Thomas spiral deeper into alcoholism and debt. She had tried to find work, but respectable employment for unmarried women was scarce in Copper Creek, and the few opportunities that existed paid barely enough to keep them fed, let alone cover Thomas's mounting debts. The sound of the bottle being uncorked made her stomach lurch. She knew that sound all too well, the beginning of another night of Thomas drowning his sorrows and her hopes in cheap whiskey. But this time was different. This time, he was trading away her future for his temporary relief. "There's a good man," Graves purred. "Just sign here and the girl reports to me tomorrow morning. I'll have Rosa show her the ropes, teach her how to smile pretty for the customers." Ellie couldn't bear to listen anymore. She had to get away, had to think, had to find some way out of this nightmare. But as she turned to flee, her boot caught on a loose floorboard, sending her stumbling forward. The door swung wide, revealing her presence to the 2 men inside. "Well, well," Graves said, his thin lips curving into a predatory smile. "Speak of the devil. Come in, my dear. Your uncle and I were just discussing your future." Thomas couldn't meet her eyes. His face was flushed with shame and alcohol, and his signature trembled as he held the pen over the makeshift contract. "Ellie, I don't have a choice." "We don't have a choice. There's always a choice, Uncle Thomas," she said quietly, stepping into the room. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "You're choosing whiskey over family, again." Graves chuckled, clearly enjoying the family drama unfolding before him. "Such spirit. My customers will appreciate that fire once it's properly channeled. Don't worry, girl. I'll take good care of you. Rosa will teach you everything you need to know about keeping men happy." The implication in his words made Ellie's skin crawl. She had seen the hollow-eyed women who worked for Graves, had watched their spirits slowly crushed under the weight of his expectations. She would rather face the harsh Montana winter alone than submit to that fate. "I won't do it," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I won't work for you, Mr. Graves. Find another way to collect your debts." Graves's smile faded, replaced by a cold, dangerous expression. "I'm afraid you don't have a say in the matter, my dear. Your uncle is your legal guardian, and he's made his decision. The contract is binding." "Like hell it is." The voice came from the doorway, deep and authoritative. All three occupants of the room turned to see a tall man silhouetted against the fading daylight. He stepped into the room, and Ellie recognized him immediately. Jake Morrison, the rancher who owned the spread just outside town. She had seen him occasionally at the general store, always polite but distant, a man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his broad shoulders. Jake was built like the mountains that surrounded Copper Creek, solid, imposing, and weathered by years of hard living. His dark hair was peppered with premature gray, and his blue eyes held a hardness that spoke of difficult experiences. He wore the typical garb of a working rancher, worn denim, leather vest, and boots that had seen countless miles of rough terrain. "Morrison," Graves said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "This is a private business matter. I suggest you remove yourself before things get unpleasant." Jake's gaze swept over the scene. The trembling girl, the drunk uncle, the contract on the table, and the bottle of whiskey that had sealed the devil's bargain. His jaw tightened as he took in the full scope of what was happening. "Business?" Jake said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This looks more like exploitation to me. Last I checked, slavery was abolished in this country. The girl owes me money," Graves snapped. "Her uncle's debts are considerable, and this is how they're choosing to pay them." "How much?" Jake asked simply. Graves blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "I beg your pardon? How much does he owe you?" "Total." $200, Graves said after a moment's hesitation. "Plus interest." Jake reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. Without counting, he placed a stack of bills on the table. "There's $300. Consider the debt paid, with interest." The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of the wind rattling the windows. Ellie stared at Jake in shock, unable to comprehend why this virtual stranger would intervene on her behalf. Thomas looked between the money and the whiskey bottle, his face a mask of confusion and shame. Graves' eyes narrowed as he studied Jake. "Very generous of you, Morrison. But the girl still needs somewhere to go. I was offering her employment, room and board. What exactly are you offering?" Jake's response came without hesitation. "Honest work, fair pay, and the respect she deserves." As the two men faced each other across the small room, Ellie realized that her fate hung in the balance between them. One represented a future of degradation and exploitation, while the other offered something she had almost forgotten existed: hope. The wind outside grew stronger, rattling the windows and door, as if the very elements were holding their breath to see which path her life would take. The tension in the small room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Graves's hand moved slowly toward his jacket where Ellie knew he kept a derringer, but Jake's posture remained relaxed, almost casual. There was something about the rancher's calm confidence that made even a dangerous man like Graves think twice. "You're making a mistake, Morrison," Graves said finally, his voice low and threatening. "The girl has no skills, no experience. She'll be nothing but a burden to you." Jake's eyes never left Graves's face. "That's my concern, not yours. Take the money and tear up that contract." Thomas, who had been silent throughout the exchange, suddenly lurched forward and grabbed the bottle of whiskey. "I need this," he mumbled, clutching it to his chest. "I need it to think straight." "Uncle Thomas, please," Ellie said, her voice breaking. "Don't you see what you've done, what you almost did to me?" But Thomas was already uncorking the bottle, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the task. "I'm sorry, Ellie, I'm so damn sorry. But I can't stop. I've tried, but I can't." Graves snatched the money from the table with one smooth motion, then pulled out the contract and slowly tore it in half. "This isn't over, Morrison. Nobody crosses Solomon Graves without consequences." "Is that a threat?" Jake asked, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. "It's a promise," Graves replied, then turned to Ellie. "And you, my dear, When you're tired of playing house with this cowboy, you know where to find me. My offer still stands." With that, he swept from the room, leaving behind only the lingering scent of expensive cologne and implied menace. Thomas had already consumed half the bottle and was slumped in his chair, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I'm sorry," he whispered again and again. "I'm so sorry, Mary. I failed her. I failed our little girl." Ellie's heart broke a little more as she realized he was talking to her dead mother. She knelt beside his chair and gently took his hand. "Uncle Thomas, I'm going to be all right. Mr. Morrison is going to help me." Thomas looked up at her with bloodshot eyes, as if seeing her for the first time. "You look just like her, you know. Just like Mary when she was your age. So beautiful, so full of life." "What have I done to you, child?" Jake cleared his throat softly. "Miss Harrison, do you have belongings you need to collect?" Ellie looked around the cramped room that had been her prison for 3 years. Her possessions could fit in a single carpet bag, a few dresses, her mother's Bible, a small wooden horse her father had carved for her when she was young, and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. "Not much," she said quietly. "Give me just a moment." As she gathered her few belongings, she could hear Jake speaking quietly to her uncle. "Tom, you need help. Real help. There's a doctor in Helena who specializes in cases like yours. I could arrange—" "No," Thomas said firmly, his voice momentarily clear. "I've made my choice, Morrison. I've been making it every day for 3 years. Just take care of her. She's all I have left of my brother." Jake's voice was gentle but firm. "She's not your responsibility anymore, Tom. She's mine." The weight of those words settled over Ellie like a heavy blanket. She was trading one form of dependence for another, but at least this time it was her choice. Sort of. When she finished packing, Jake took her carpet bag and gestured toward the door. "My wagon's outside. We should go before it gets full dark." The ride to Jake's ranch was conducted mostly in silence. Ellie sat stiffly beside him on the wagon seat, acutely aware of his presence and the strange turn her life had taken. The Montana landscape rolled past them in the fading light. Endless grassland punctuated by rocky outcroppings and the distant silhouette of mountains against the darkening sky. "Mr. Morrison," she finally said, her voice barely audible above the creaking of the wagon wheels. "Why did you help me?" Jake was quiet for so long that she wondered if he had heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I suppose because someone should have helped me once, and they didn't." "What do you mean?" He glanced at her briefly, then returned his attention to the road. "That's a story for another time, Miss Harrison. For now, let's focus on getting you settled." As they crested a small hill, Ellie saw the ranch spread out below them. It was larger than she had expected. A main house built of sturdy logs with a wide front porch, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals that currently held about 50 head of cattle. Smoke rose from the chimney and warm light glowed from the windows, making it look like something from a dream. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's home," Jake said simply. "Or it will be, if you'll have it." He helped her down from the wagon, and she was surprised by the gentleness of his touch. For such a large, imposing man, he moved with careful consideration, as if he were afraid of frightening her. The front door opened before they reached it, and a woman emerged onto the porch. She was perhaps 40 years old, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, and kind eyes that immediately put Ellie at ease. "Jake Morrison, what have you brought home now?" the woman asked, but her tone was warm and welcoming. "Ellie, this is Mrs. Sarah Chen. She keeps house for me and makes sure I don't starve to death. Sarah, this is Eleanor Harrison. She'll be staying with us for a while." Mrs. Chen's eyes took in Ellie's appearance, the worn dress, the thin shawl, the haunted look in her eyes, and her expression softened with understanding. "Well, come in, dear. You look half frozen. I've got stew on the stove and biscuits in the oven." The interior of the house was warm and inviting, with handcrafted furniture and colorful rugs that spoke of comfort rather than luxury. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the air was filled with the mouth-watering aroma of beef stew and fresh bread. "I'll show you to your room," Mrs. Chen said, leading Ellie down a hallway lined with family photographs. "It's not much, but it's clean and private. You'll have your own washstand and everything." The room was indeed small but spotlessly clean, with a comfortable-looking bed covered in a colorful quilt, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. After 3 years of sharing cramped quarters with her drunken uncle, it felt like a palace. "Mrs. Chen," Ellie said hesitantly, "I need you to know that I can work. I can cook, clean, sew, tend animals. I don't want to be a burden." The older woman smiled and patted her hand. "Don't you worry about that, dear. We'll figure out how you can contribute. For now, just focus on getting settled. Jake's a good man, perhaps the best I've ever known. You're safe here." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Jake appeared in the doorway. He had removed his hat and vest, and Ellie noticed for the first time the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Miss Harrison, I wanted to discuss your situation with you if you don't mind. Sarah, could you give us a moment?" Mrs. Chen nodded and left them alone. Jake remained standing by the door as if he were afraid to come too close. "I want you to understand that there are no expectations here beyond honest work for honest pay. You're not indentured to me, and you're free to leave whenever you choose. And if I have nowhere else to go, then you stay," he said simply. "This ranch is big enough for all of us, and there's always more work than we can handle. But I want you to know that you have choices now. Real choices." Ellie sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the day. "I don't understand why you're being so kind to me. You don't even know me." Jake was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes studying her face. "Maybe that's exactly why," he said finally. "Sometimes strangers can offer what family cannot." That night, as Ellie lay in her comfortable bed listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night, she found herself thinking about the man who had saved her from a fate worse than death. There was something about Jake Morrison that intrigued her, a sadness in his eyes that matched her own, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rugged exterior. For the first time in 3 years, Eleanor May Harrison fell asleep feeling safe. And in the room down the hall, Jake Morrison lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what he had gotten himself into, and why the sight of tears in a stranger's green eyes had moved him to act so impulsively. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the promise of change and the hope of new beginnings. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to paint the eastern sky when Ellie woke to the sound of activity in the yard below her window. She dressed quickly in one of her plain work dresses and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Mrs. Chen already preparing breakfast. "Good morning, dear," the older woman said warmly. "You're up early for someone who's had such a difficult time." "I'm used to early mornings," Ellie replied, rolling up her sleeves. "What can I do to help?" Mrs. Chen smiled approvingly. "You can start by slicing that ham while I finish these eggs. Jake likes a hearty breakfast before he starts his day." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Jake appeared in the doorway, his hair still damp from washing and his shirt partially unbuttoned. Ellie felt an unexpected flutter in her chest at the sight of him, so different from the intimidating figure who had rescued her the night before. "Morning, Sarah, Miss Harrison." He nodded to both women as he poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove. "I hope you slept well. Better than I have in months," Ellie admitted, focusing intently on the ham to avoid looking at him directly. "Thank you again for everything." "No need for thanks. We take care of our own here." He paused, seeming to consider his words. "Speaking of which, I thought you might like to learn about the ranch operation. If you're interested, that is." Ellie looked up, surprised by the offer. "I'd like that very much." After breakfast, Jake led her outside into the crisp morning air. The ranch was already bustling with activity as the ranch hands prepared for the day's work. Jake introduced her to the men, a mixture of experienced cowboys and young hands learning the trade, and Ellie was pleased to note that they all treated her with respect, no doubt following their boss's lead. "The Morrison Ranch has been in operation for 8 years, Jake explained as they walked toward the main corral. "We run about 200 head of cattle, mostly shorthorns and Herefords. Good beef cattle that can handle the Montana winters." "How did you come to own so much land?" Ellie asked, genuinely curious. Jake's expression grew distant. "I worked for the railroad for 5 years after the war, saved every penny I could. When I heard about the Homestead Act, I knew it was my chance to build something permanent." He paused, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I was tired of moving, tired of never having roots anywhere." There was something in his tone that made Ellie suspect there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Instead, she watched as he demonstrated how to check the cattle for signs of illness or injury, his hands gentle but sure as he examined each animal. You're good with them, she observed. Animals are honest, he replied. They don't lie or pretend to be something they're not. If you treat them fairly, they'll do the same for you. As the days passed, Ellie found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life. She helped Mrs. Chen with the household duties, learned to milk the cows, and even tried her hand at feeding the chickens, though the aggressive rooster seemed determined to make her life difficult. Don't let him intimidate you, Jake said one morning, having witnessed her latest battle with the belligerent bird. He's all bluster and no bite. Easy for you to say, Ellie replied, rubbing her arm where the rooster had pecked her. He seems to have taken a personal dislike to me. Jake chuckled, the first genuine laugh she had heard from him. Here, let me show you. He approached the rooster with calm confidence, and the bird immediately settled down. It's all about attitude. Animals can sense fear. And what if I actually am afraid? Then you pretend not to be until it becomes real, he said, his blue eyes meeting hers. That's a lesson that applies to more than just roosters. As autumn deepened into winter, Ellie found herself looking forward to these daily interactions with Jake. He was a man of few words, but when he did speak, it was with quiet wisdom and dry humor that she found increasingly appealing. She began to notice small things about him. The way he always removed his hat when speaking to her, how he never raised his voice even when dealing with stubborn livestock, and the gentle way he treated the ranch's old border collie, Rex. One evening in late November, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Ellie was helping Mrs. Chen prepare dinner when they heard the sound of horses approaching at a gallop. Jake emerged from the barn, his face grim as he recognized the rider. It's Doc Williams from town, he said, helping the elderly physician down from his horse. What brings you out in this weather, Doc? It's Tom Harrison, the doctor said, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. He's taken a turn for the worse. Hasn't been out of his room in 3 days, and when I checked on him this morning, he shook his head sadly. I don't think he has much time left. Ellie felt the blood drain from her face. Despite everything her uncle had done, he was still family, the last link to her parents and her childhood. I need to go to him, she said quietly. Ellie, are you sure? Mrs. Chen asked gently. After what he tried to do to you? He's sick, Ellie replied firmly. He needs help, and I'm the only family he has left. Jake was already moving toward the barn. I'll hitch up the wagon. We can be there in an hour. The ride to town was conducted in tense silence, with Jake's steady presence beside her, the only thing keeping Ellie's composure intact. When they arrived at the Silver Dollar, they found Thomas in his bed, his face gaunt and his breathing labored. The smell of unwashed bodies and stale whiskey permeated the small room. Uncle Thomas, Ellie said softly, taking his hand. I'm here. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment they were clear and focused. Ellie, my dear girl, what are you doing here? You shouldn't see me like this. I couldn't stay away, she whispered, fighting back tears. You're my family. Thomas's grip tightened weakly on her hand. I'm so sorry, child. So very sorry for what I almost did to you. Your father would never forgive me. Papa would understand, Ellie said, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. He knew about your struggles. I tried to stop, Thomas continued, his voice barely audible. After you left, I tried to put down the bottle, but it was too late. Too many years, too many mistakes. Jake, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. Tom, is there anything you need? Anyone you want us to contact? Thomas shook his head weakly. Just take care of her. Promise me, you'll take care of her. She's all that's left of something good in this world. I promise, Jake said solemnly. Thomas smiled then, a ghost of the man he had once been. You're a good man, Morrison. I can see it in your eyes. You won't let the world break her spirit like it broke mine. They stayed with him through the night, taking turns holding his hand and talking quietly about better times. Ellie told him stories about her parents, about the happy memories from before the accident, while Jake simply provided a steady, comforting presence in the shadows. Thomas Harrison died just as the sun was rising, his breathing simply stopping as peacefully as a man falling asleep. Ellie cried then, not just for her uncle, but for everything she had lost, her parents, her childhood, her sense of security in the world. Jake didn't try to console her with empty words. Instead, he simply wrapped his arms around her and let her grieve, his strong embrace providing the anchor she needed in her storm of emotions. He wasn't always like this, she whispered against his chest. When I was little, he used to visit us and bring me candy. He would tell such wonderful stories about his adventures. I know, Jake said softly, his hand stroking her hair. The bottle doesn't change who a person really is. It just buries them so deep they can't find their way back. The funeral was small but dignified. Jake paid for everything, despite Ellie's protests, and even convinced Father Mackenzie to conduct the service despite Thomas's reputation. As they stood beside the grave in the small cemetery overlooking the town, Ellie felt the last chapter of her old life closing. "What happens now?" she asked as they walked back to the wagon. Jake stopped and turned to face her, his blue eyes serious and intent. "Now we go home," he said simply, "and we build something better." As they rode back to the ranch through the lightly falling snow, Ellie realized that somewhere in the past month, the Morrison Ranch had indeed become home. And the man beside her, with his quiet strength and unexpected kindness, had become something she hadn't dared hope for in 3 long years. He had become her reason to believe in tomorrow. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it the promise of renewal and growth. Ellie had been at the Morrison Ranch for 6 months, and in that time, she had transformed from a frightened, desperate girl into a confident young woman who could handle any task the ranch demanded. She was in the garden behind the house planting vegetables for the coming season, when Jake approached with an unusual nervousness in his demeanor. He had been acting strangely for weeks, finding excuses to be near her, stumbling over words that usually came easily to him. "Ellie," he said, removing his hat and running his fingers through his dark hair, "could I speak with you for a moment?" She looked up from the tomato seedlings she was transplanting, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. "Of course. What is it?" Jake knelt beside her in the dirt, seemingly unconcerned about his clean shirt and trousers. "I've been thinking about what Tom said that night about taking care of you." "Jake, you've already done more than—" "Let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I've been thinking about it, and I realized that somewhere along the way, taking care of you stopped being an obligation and became something I wanted to do. Something I needed to do." Ellie's heart began to race as she saw the intensity in his blue eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you, Eleanor May Harrison. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you make this old ranch feel like a real home. I love how you're not afraid to get your hands dirty. And I love how you hum while you work in the kitchen." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. "This was my mother's. She would have wanted you to have it if you'll accept it. If you'll accept me." Ellie's hands were shaking as she looked at the ring, then back at Jake's earnest face. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking you to be my partner in every sense of the word. To build this ranch with me. To raise a family with me. To grow old with me. I know I'm not much of a catch. I'm set in my ways, I work too hard, and I'm not always good with words. But I promise you'll never want for anything, and I'll spend every day of my life making sure you know how much you mean to me." Tears sprang to Ellie's eyes as she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a commodity to be traded for whiskey. Now she was being offered a true partnership with a man who saw her worth. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Jake Morrison, I'll marry you." The ring slipped onto her finger as if it had been made for her, and when Jake pulled her into his arms and kissed her, Ellie tasted the salt of her own tears and the sweetness of new beginnings. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Copper Creek, with Mrs. Chen as matron of honor and half the town in attendance. Even some of Jake's ranch hands had cleaned up for the occasion, and Ellie was touched by their genuine happiness for their boss. As they stood at the altar, promising to love and honor each other through whatever trials lay ahead, Ellie caught sight of Solomon Graves in the back pew, his cold eyes fixed on her with undisguised hatred. But instead of fear, she felt only pity for the man who had tried to buy her soul. Jake must have noticed her momentary distraction, because he squeezed her hand gently, drawing her attention back to him. "No looking back," he whispered, "only forward." The reception was held at the ranch with tables set up in the yard and Mrs. Chen's finest cooking displayed in abundance. As the evening wore on and the dancing began, Ellie found herself swept up in the celebration, marveling at how different her life had become. "Happy?" Jake asked as they swayed together to the music of a fiddle and guitar. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, looking up into his face. Thank you for seeing something worth saving in me. Thank you for letting me love you," he said, spinning her around as the music swelled. "Thank you for making me whole again." As the stars came out over the Montana sky, the guests began to drift home, leaving the newlyweds alone with their future stretching out before them like an endless prairie. They stood together on the porch watching the last of the lanterns disappear down the road toward town. "Any regrets?" Jake asked, his arm around her waist. Ellie thought about her uncle, about the pain and fear that had brought her to this place, about the long journey from desperation to hope. "None," she said firmly. "Everything that happened led me to you, to this moment, to this life. I wouldn't change any of it." Inside the house, Mrs. Chen had left a small gift on the kitchen table, a wooden sign painted with careful script. "The Morrison Family Home, Esther 1884. Ellie traced the letters with her finger, marveling at how those simple words represented everything she had ever wanted. "Ready to start our life together, Mrs. Morrison?" Jake asked, offering her his arm. "More than ready, Mr. Morrison," she replied, taking his hand and following him toward their shared future. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the promise of rain for the growing season, of prosperity for the ranch, and of love that would endure through all the challenges and joys that lay ahead. Eleanor May Morrison fell asleep in her husband's arms that night, safe in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. Home at last, with the man who had shown her that even the darkest night could lead to the brightest dawn. And in the quiet hours before sunrise, Jake Morrison held his wife close and whispered a prayer of gratitude for the miracle that had brought them together, knowing that some of life's greatest blessings come disguised as its worst disasters. The lonely rancher was lonely no more. What did you think of Jake and Ellie's incredible journey from desperation to love? Did this heartwarming tale of courage, redemption, and finding home in the most unexpected places touch your heart? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us your favorite moment from their story, or share if you have your own tales of unexpected kindness changing someone's life forever. If you enjoyed this emotional roller coaster set in the rugged beauty of 1880s Montana, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories that celebrate the triumph of the human spirit. Your support helps us continue bringing you these powerful narratives that remind us all that even in our darkest moments, hope and love can still find a way to shine through.